Amboseli Reserve, late morning. A male elephant emerged from the south trail, walking with a lopsided gait. His right front leg dragged slightly. Blood marked the dust beneath each step, a thin smear that darkened at the joint. The wound wasn't fresh. It had dried, cracked, reopened. Each movement pulled at it again. The air held the quiet heat of midday. Wind low, grass still. No herds followed him. No calves. No scent of others. He was alone. The path he took was not used by animals often. A salt trail carved decades ago, now dry and crusted over. But he walked it, slow and straight. His ears did not lift to the calls in the distance. His trunk stayed low, curling briefly at stones before moving on. When he reached the edge of the clearing near the first boundary marker carved into stone, he paused. One leg shifted behind him. He leaned slightly, breath flaring from his sides. Then he took 2 more steps forward, into open space. Ranger Elias had been watching from the shade. He'd seen elephants hesitate at the markers before, but never step past. Not like this. He stood without rushing. The elephant didn't move. Dust curled near the animal's feet, catching the blood as it dripped. Elias took 3 slow steps forward and stopped just inside the edge of the open patch. No radio call, no sudden movement. He kept his hands low, palms open, eyes level. The elephant's head dipped once, not fully, but enough. His trunk dragged lightly through the dirt. From that distance, Elias could see the wound clearly now, a deep cut across the front joint, thickened with blackened edges. Old rope marks ran just below it. Possibly a snare, possibly wire. The leg was swollen badly, skin stretched where it shouldn't be. When the elephant lifted it, even slightly, his whole body tensed. Then he planted it again, hard and deliberate. Still, he did not turn away. The sun moved slowly overhead. Elias didn't speak. He waited. Behind him, a second ranger emerged quietly, holding a shallow pan of water. The man paused when he saw the elephant in full. "He's not here by mistake," Elias said under his breath. "He walked this far for a reason." The elephant shifted again. A low, muffled rumble rolled through his chest. Not loud, not threatening. More like a breath too deep for silence. His ears twitched once. A bird called from the bush nearby. He did not react. Flies gathered near the wound. His tail barely flicked. If he turned now, they wouldn't stop him. If he ran, the leg wouldn't hold. If he stayed, he might still bleed too much. Either way, he was at risk. The next few hours would decide everything. Elias motioned for the other ranger to set the pan down and step back. No other sounds were made. The elephant took 1 more step forward. He stopped again, just inside the boundary line. Then he lowered his head, very slightly, and let his trunk brush the flat stone carved with the ranger crest. The gesture was slow, uncertain but deliberate. The dust rose again, soft, windless, then settled around his feet. Elias stepped forward slowly, boots pressing soft imprints into the dust. The elephant stood still, 1 foot angled outward, weight unevenly balanced between his 3 good legs. The wound above the knee was now fully visible, a dark, split gash with swollen tissue curled outward in hard ridges. Part of it had scabbed over and cracked again. The skin around it was tight and hot, thick with flies and streaked with dried mud where he'd tried to cool it. Old marks just below hinted at wire once looped around the leg, and newer ones higher up looked deeper, sharper, possibly from a spear. Either way, it had been festering for days. Maybe more. Elias stopped just outside the inner stone ring. The elephant lifted his head a little but didn't back away. His eyes tracked the ranger, lids heavy. Breath moved through his trunk in short, uneven bursts. He shifted, and the front leg wobbled slightly. Blood pulsed from one corner of the wound again. Elias didn't speak. He waited, arms loose, breath steady, letting the stillness stretch. The elephant didn't lift his ears, didn't stamp, didn't turn. He stayed rooted, as though movement had cost too much already. His trunk swung briefly toward the ground, then coiled back under his chin. It was not curiosity, it was weight. His body sagged beneath its own pain. Elias gave a small hand signal. 2 more rangers appeared behind the line, silent, each carrying small water vessels and gauze packs. They didn't approach, not yet. The plan was patience. If they pushed too soon, the elephant might turn, and if he turned fast, the leg could tear again. If he ran, he would collapse. If he stayed, he might survive. Elias stepped a little closer, 1 foot at a time. He stopped just 6 feet from the front line, not near enough to reach the animal, but close enough for presence. The elephant's trunk extended halfway, then paused in the air. For a second, it hung between them. Then it dropped. He made a low sound, barely audible, more breath than voice. There were signs of dehydration in the way his skin hung around the stomach, how the lines on his trunk stayed after movement. His mouth opened once, closed again. No sound followed. But he didn't leave. He did not retreat even when Elias shifted his weight or knelt down slowly with one hand pressed to the ground for balance. The rangers watched from behind the stone line. One whispered, "He's asking." Elias didn't answer. He focused on the leg, on the slight heat shimmer that rose around the swollen joint, on the torn edge that looked like it had once been banded tight, then ripped loose. It was not a clean wound. There would be rot. There might already be infection deep in the muscle. If they moved him now, the pain could send him into shock. If they waited too long, infection might travel further. There was no ideal moment, only the choice between risks. Elias drew a small pouch of cool water from his belt, opened the cap slowly, and poured a stream onto the dry ground beside him. The elephant's trunk moved again, not toward the bottle but toward the wet soil. It touched once, pressed lightly, then curled back. Nothing more happened for several minutes. The air held steady. Dust hung low near the ground. The elephant did not lie down, but neither did he leave. His leg trembled once, then held. Elias placed the pouch on the ground and stepped back. The elephant made no move to follow. He only shifted his weight again, pain visible in the slowness of it. Then he stood still once more, waiting, not ready to fall, not yet. The heat leaned heavier as the sun climbed, casting dry shadows beneath the scrub trees lining the compound. Elias hadn't moved from the edge of the marker stones, but behind him, the others had begun to shift. 2 rangers came forward slowly with shallow water pans. Old aluminum dishes filled just enough to catch light, not startle. They placed them halfway between the boundary and where Elias stood, then stepped back without turning their backs. No words were spoken. No sudden motions. The elephant did not react. His eyes were half-lidded now. Not shut, but sunken, dull. Flies traced lines along his cheek folds and legs, lingering at the thick crust near the wound. His trunk rose once toward the scent of water, then dropped again before reaching. Each breath lifted his ribs in short, uneven waves. He shifted weight onto his back legs, head lowered. Then, with one halting motion, he began to lower himself to the earth. It wasn't graceful. He bent forward first, testing the ground with his trunk as if unsure whether the soil would hold him. Then one knee gave slightly, then the other. His wounded leg collapsed beneath him last, folding awkwardly. The elephant dropped slowly, not with force, but fatigue. A cloud of dust lifted around his body and settled across the field. His head sank, chin against the ground, and for several seconds he did not move at all. Elias took one step forward and stopped. The others remained back. The moment held a quiet kind of permission. In the wild, a resting bull is vulnerable. Lying down in the open, surrounded by humans, was not instinct. It was concession. Either trust or surrender. The elephant's breathing grew louder now that he was lower. A soft wheeze underlined each exhale. His ears no longer flicked. The flies returned unhindered. His trunk coiled loosely on the dust, unmoving. He blinked once, slow and heavy. The dust clung to his eyelashes, forming tiny ridges of brown at the edges of his eyes. He made no effort to shake it off. The stakes had shifted. If he remained down too long, circulation would slow further. If they approached too soon, panic could force him upright and damage the joint again. The wound, still oozing lightly from its open edge, now pressed directly into the earth. Every passing hour carried risk. Heat stroke, swelling, internal stress. Elias crouched quietly, resting on the balls of his feet, and watched for signs of tension. None came. No muscles twitched. No ears rose. The elephant stayed still, not limp but braced, holding himself just enough to keep from collapsing fully. Water seeped into the soil from the closest pan, forming a thin, dark ring. A few sparrows approached and landed near the edge, hopping close, then scattering again. The elephant's trunk shifted an inch. Not toward them, not toward Elias. Just enough to stretch out fully. Then it stilled again. "We're almost there," Elias whispered, more to the silence than the animal. The words didn't expect a response. Behind him, the vet team waited out of sight, sedative prepared but unused. The decision would come soon, but not yet. For now, the elephant lay in the dust, silent, breathing, with flies along his brow and nothing between him and the earth. The day held still. The wind had not returned. A cloud passed slowly overhead, offering no shade, just a moment's pause in the color of light across his skin. Elias remained at the outer edge of the field as the sun began its slow descent behind the acacia trees. The wind shifted only slightly, warm and dry against his neck. He had been still for most of the day, moving only when the elephant's breathing steadied. The animal had not stood. He had not rolled or flinched or pulled his wounded leg inward. But he had not left either. His body remained folded against the ground, front legs tucked beneath his chest, wounded knee exposed and swollen. His eyes barely opened. His trunk, when it moved at all, curled into the dust and rested there. The team had stepped back hours ago, leaving Elias as the only figure in the elephant's field of vision. He crouched again, then lowered slowly to one knee. He stayed like that for a long time. The ground beneath him was cracked, dry from months without true rain, and the smell of dust clung to his clothes. He placed a hand in the dirt beside him, not forward, not closer, just steady, a marker of presence, not pressure. The elephant shifted once. Not much, just a soft lean, like a muscle relaxing slightly. The flies returned, circling his leg, his brow. His ears moved faintly. Elias took a breath and moved 1 foot forward. Then he stopped again. If the elephant stirred or tensed, he'd freeze, but there was no warning, no sound, just breath and stillness. The distance between them had narrowed by less than a meter, but it felt like something more, less physical, more fragile. He whispered something low, only once, a sound more than a sentence. The elephant did not respond, not with movement, but a shift came. From deep inside the animal's chest, a short, low rumble began. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't loud, just a hollow sound, like a drum struck softly in a cave. Then it stopped. That was all. The sun hit the top of the reserve wall in long gold streaks. Time was against them. If the elephant didn't allow intervention before nightfall, the risk of swelling, infection, or collapse would rise sharply. Once darkness came, sedation would be nearly impossible. If he rose too fast or startled, the leg might not bear him. If he stayed down too long, the weight on his internal organs could shift dangerously. Elias leaned forward, elbows resting on his thighs now. Not reaching, not yet, just presence. The elephant's eye opened slightly, Not fully, just a slit of gray under the dust-crusted lid. The air between them was still. No breeze, no flies between their faces. Elias held his breath. Not from fear, but respect. Then the elephant's trunk moved. Slowly, just a few inches. Toward the ground, not toward him. Then it fell still again. That was the sign they needed. Not trust, not permission, but a kind of tolerance that meant they could try. A breeze finally passed through the grass behind the compound. It touched nothing else, just a ripple through the taller stems, bending them once before letting go. The sky above them was soft with heat haze, and the day had begun to fold inward. Elias didn't move again. He simply stayed where he was, one step closer, both knees in the dust, waiting with the kind of silence that does not need answering. The wind began to lift just before dusk, brushing gently across the flat edge of the compound where the elephant lay. The dry air carried a faint bitterness, the kind that follows days of heat without rain. The grass along the boundary shifted, but the elephant did not. His body, sunk deep into the earth now, seemed heavier than before. His side rose with effort, each breath slower than the last. The blood near the joint had thickened to a crusted seal, but infection lingered beneath it. The swelling had spread further up the leg, into the upper folds of skin that now pulled taut and discolored. Elias remained close, no more than 4 meters from the bull. His knees pressed into the dust, body leaned forward but unmoving. The water pan had long since emptied. A single ranger sat behind him, just inside the cover of a low scrub line, whispering updates into the radio every few minutes. The vet team had been cleared for approach. They moved now, slowly, quietly, carrying only what was necessary. The dart rifle made no sound as it was readied. The decision to sedate had come with careful weight. If the elephant resisted, stood, or ran, the leg could fail entirely. If he didn't respond at all, it might mean organ decline. But the team could wait no longer. Night was coming. The risk of infection reaching his bloodstream was growing by the hour. A soft nod from Elias gave the signal. The vet raised the rifle, not high, not quick, and aimed at the thick muscle near the elephant's shoulder. The distance was short. The shot landed without echo. A whisper more than a sound. The dart struck just above the joint, embedding cleanly. The elephant flinched. Not sharply, just a tightening through the ribs, a stiffening of his trunk. Then stillness returned. He did not rise. He did not shift. The medication would take minutes to work. Elias remained in place, eyes locked on the bull's breathing. One exhale, another, then another, each drawn longer than the last. The trunk flexed once, curling slightly toward the left. Then it dropped fully to the earth. His eyes didn't close, but the lids lowered, just enough to dim the whites. The leg didn't twitch. The muscle around the dart stayed firm. Behind the rangers, a soft click from the timer began. 8 minutes. That was all they had. No more. The team moved slowly with gauze, salve, and flushing solution. There was no speaking. Every motion was deliberate, practiced. The wound, once washed, revealed the extent of damage. Rotted tissue at the center, old foreign strands buried within the skin. Possibly wire, possibly bone fragments. Either way, it had begun to turn inside. If untreated, it would have entered the bloodstream. Collapse would have followed. They worked in silence. Gauze pressed gently. A dull blade scraped the dead tissue. Fluid was drawn from the swollen pockets. The elephant gave one low breath, then fell quiet again. His skin twitched only once when cold salve touched the wound. His eyes remained half-closed, unmoving. When it was done, they stepped back. The dart was removed. The leg was bound loosely, just enough to hold pressure but not constrict. The sedative would fade slowly. They couldn't rush the return. If he woke too fast, panic could undo everything. If too slow, the circulation would dip. The vet glanced at Elias. "We'll wait," Elias said. His voice didn't rise. The others backed away to the far edge, taking only the instruments. The field fell still again, except for the distant call of birds returning to the low branches near the riverbed. A last breath rose from the elephant's chest, long and soft, then faded into the grass around him. The sun had dropped low, casting thin orange across the tops of the trees. He did not move, but he was still there, present, breathing, and for the first time since morning, the dust above his back lifted, caught in a breeze that turned toward the south. The sedation had faded by the time night settled fully, but the elephant did not rise. His breathing had grown more rhythmic, steadier than before, but his body remained low and heavy, as if the earth beneath him was the only surface he trusted. The stars above glinted faintly through a veil of dust that still hung over the plains. The wind moved lightly through the grasses, brushing the tall stalks in waves. No one spoke unless necessary. The rangers rotated quietly, keeping distance, their presence more like shadow than sound. Elias didn't leave his post. In the morning light, the team returned to clean the wound again. Now that some swelling had eased and more of the surface had softened, the deeper work could begin. The odor from the infection had worsened, a thick, sour presence that clung to their gloves and sleeves. They cut carefully around the hardened edges, revealing deeper damage than expected. The tissue beneath was dark and spongy, heat rising off of it even in the cooler air. The wound was weeks old, possibly more. When the vet flushed the deeper cavity with saline, a piece of thin, rusted wire surfaced, twisted and bent inward like it had once coiled around itself. It had likely been embedded from the start, either from a poacher's snare or a broken fence edge, and then swallowed by swelling. Beside it, packed deep in muscle, were two small splinters of rotted wood. The tissue around them had decayed inward. The elephant hadn't just been limping, he had been carrying rot. They worked in silence, removing what they could, packing the void with medicated gauze, then sealing the site loosely. The drainage would need time. Time he might not have. But for now, they had cleared the worst of it. It explained everything. The steady limp, the slow collapse, the stillness. This wasn't an animal seeking water or shelter. This was a body giving itself up, quietly, before it failed entirely. Elias stood at the edge and looked at him, at the way the trunk curled in toward his chin, at the dried blood still flaking near his ear folds. This wasn't just submission, it was will. There were no herds nearby, no footprints leading him here, no vocalizations from others. He had walked alone, limped, likely, through bushland and dry plains, over hard ground, favoring a leg that should have been unusable. However far he had come, it had been far enough to mean something. If he'd stayed out there, one of the younger rangers murmured, he wouldn't have made another day. Elias didn't answer. The elephant's eye was open, dry at the edge but focused, tracking slow movement without effort. He was awake, aware, but empty of alarm. The kind of gaze that didn't seek response, only rest. His body did not protest the treatment. His leg, though bound and supported with cloth and compress, remained still. He did not shift weight. He did not attempt to rise. He just lay there, wind passing over him, watching the people work. The risk remained high. Infection could still spread. If the rot had entered his bloodstream before treatment, internal failure could follow. He might not recover strength in the leg. If he tried to stand too soon, the pressure could undo everything. But if he continued to rest, and if the wound held clean, there was still a path forward. Thin, but there. By late afternoon, the air had turned softer, and the sun leaned low against the backs of the trees. The team stepped away one by one. The compound was quiet again. Elias knelt a few paces off, dust curling around his boots. The elephant didn't move, but his breathing held steady, slow and rough as if something inside him had shifted just enough to stay. The wind brushed the surface of the grass beside his flank, bending it gently, then letting it rise again. The evening drew down gently, casting long shadows across the clearing. The rangers had cleared the field, but none had gone far. Elias remained just within the edge of light, kneeling in the dust that held the shape of the elephant's body. The silence was full but not heavy. Only the soft clicks of insects rose and fell from the edge of the bush, and a dry wind swept lightly across the open soil. The elephant had not risen. His breathing, though still labored, had stabilized. Each rise of his flank was slower now, but even. He blinked rarely, and when he did, the lashes moved stiffly as though coated in the weight of dried grit. His trunk, once coiled and unmoving, now stretched softly toward the packed soil near his chest. Not reaching, just idly brushing the surface as though reacquainting with the feel of the ground. Elias kept his position, quiet, hands at rest on his knees. There was no need to speak, nothing left to ask. The wound had been drained, packed, and wrapped. The vet had said the margins looked better than expected, but they all knew it was still uncertain. One fever, one bad night, one stumble, and it would tip. But for now, the wound held. The body hadn't rejected it, and the elephant was still here. Then, without shift or signal, the elephant's trunk began to move again. Slower this time, curling forward through the fine dust in a motion that seemed deliberate but not strained. It paused once near his own front leg, then dragged lightly across a small depression in the earth. Elias watched as a slight mound of dried dirt crumbled away, revealing something buried shallow beneath it, something hard, smoothed at one end. The elephant curled his trunk under the object and nudged it toward Elias, slow and unshaken. Not flung, not dropped, just pushed. A short, hesitant slide until it rolled free of its casing of mud and came to rest near the ranger's boots. Elias didn't move at first. He looked down. A broken tusk tip, caked in hardened soil, no longer than a man's hand, its edge dulled with time. Possibly snapped in conflict, possibly fractured in a fall. There was no blood on it now, just the color of old earth. Elias reached forward slowly and lifted it from the dirt. It was heavier than it looked, worn smooth on one side, rough and jagged on the other. The elephant did not reach again. His trunk curled back beneath him. His eyes closed fully now, lids heavy with exhaustion more than sleep. The gesture was finished. Nothing else followed, but it lingered. Elias sat back slowly, tusk in hand, and did not speak. There was no meaning to assign, no message to draw, just a fact. The elephant had carried it with him, buried it, unearthed it, and now it had been passed on. The rangers at the edge remained still. No one asked what it meant. Not aloud. If the elephant rose again, there would be long days of walking ahead. If not, they would keep watch until the very last breath. But this moment, this soft exchange in the last warmth of day, held more weight than explanation could offer. Some animals speak only once, and only when they choose. The last light passed through the thin veil of grass beyond the clearing, turning each blade pale gold. A bird called once, far off toward the river, then fell silent. The wind settled just enough to let the dust lie undisturbed beside the resting body. Before dawn, the air held still. The trees stood motionless against a pale horizon, their edges blunted by the faint silver light that came just before color. The camp was quiet. No one stirred yet. Only the low breath of animals far beyond the compound could be felt, not heard, a presence more than a sound. Elias sat where he had remained since the night before, knees bent, spine curved from hours of stillness, the tusk fragment resting in the cradle of his hand. His eyes had not left the elephant. The bull had not moved for most of the night. Only the shallow rise of his ribs and the occasional twitch of his trunk showed he was still holding on. The wound, still packed and cooling beneath gauze, had not bled again. No fever had come. But the silence was not a promise. There were still risks ahead. Muscle failure, infection, collapse. He might not rise at all. But there was one more thing left to see. As the first threads of gold brushed across the eastern ridge, the elephant shifted. Not a stretch or a stir. A shift, the kind that gathers weight slowly beneath itself. He straightened his head, then tucked his good front leg in closer, as if searching for leverage. The trunk braced once against the earth, failed, then coiled inward again. Elias didn't move. He only tightened his grip around the tusk tip, holding it still. Then the back legs pressed downward, one at a time. The elephant's body tilted as weight moved forward, and a slow grunt pushed from deep within his chest. His front limbs trembled beneath him. The injured one didn't fully lock, but it braced just enough. The rise was not quick. It was not smooth, but it was real. Inch by inch, he lifted from the ground. Dust fell from his flank in small bursts. His trunk lifted last, curling midair as his body settled into a full, uneven stand. He didn't sway. He didn't collapse. He simply stood, head lowered slightly, legs bent under the weight of days spent on the ground. The bandage around his knee had darkened with the morning's moisture, but it held. The wind caught the end of it once, flapping weakly, then fell quiet again. The others had stepped out now. Quiet figures in the distance, watching from the scrub. No one spoke. No signal was given. The elephant did not need direction. After 2 long breaths, he took his first step. It was slow, uneven, the injured leg trailing with careful delay. But he moved forward. Then again. Each step was measured. The limp was pronounced. But there was no collapse. He passed the edge of the compound without hesitation, without pause. His ears twitched slightly in the breeze. His trunk touched the ground once, then rose again. Elias remained seated. He didn't follow. He didn't call out. He only watched as the elephant reached the far line of trees. The figure moved between light and shadow, shape bending slightly with each step, but never stopping. He never looked back. Not once. He didn't pause at the boundary stone. He didn't lift his head. He walked with what little strength he had out into the thinning grass toward whatever distance he could still carry. Elias stayed until the shape disappeared between the trees. The tusk piece rested now against his thigh, warm from his hand. The light around him brightened. Grass swayed softly in the returning wind. Far out, beyond what eyes could follow, birds lifted slow from the tops of the trees and turned into the morning air.